Okay, guys, welcome back. So now we're going to go on and move on to chapters 3 and 4 today. We are still reading our book. The title is Hatchet. The author is Gary Paulson. If you remember, the author is the person who wrote the book, Gary Paulson. Now, again, we are reading an adapted version of the book, so our chapters are just a lot shorter. So let's go ahead and look at the chapter 3. So chapter 3 is up on your screen. I'm also going to have chapter 3 right here in my hand. Chapter 3. Remember, our main character is still Brian. Brian thought he was going to die. He tried to steer the plane. Brian hit his head on the wheel. Brian crashed the plane in the water. Brian swam to land. Then he passed out. So we have our picture of Brian here, a picture of a plane in the process of crashing, and then Brian swimming to shore. So that's what happened for chapter 3. Let's go ahead and check out chapter 4. Chapter 4. Brian remembered the secret of his parents' divorce. He remembered the plane crash. Brian's head, back, and legs hurt from the crash. He had to swim from the plane, and his clothes were still wet. Bugs bit Brian. He was tired. He watched the water. Brian fell asleep against a tree. So when Brian came to, he remembered the secret of his parents' divorce. Brian hurt all over. And then, at the end of the chapter, he fell asleep against the tree. So that concludes chapter 4. So now we're going to go ahead and look at the questions that go with chapter 3 and 4. Just like last time, if you have the questions in front of you, that's great. If not, just get a paper and pencil and you can go follow along with us. Okay? So let's look at chapter 3 and 4 questions. Chapter 3. What's the title of the story? What's the title of the book we're reading? Is it Flying to Mars? Is it Hatchet? Or is it Twilight? Pick the title and write it down, or if you have this, just circle it. That's right. The title is Hatchet. That's the title of our story. It's Hatchet. So have Hatchet written on your paper or circle it. Number 2, who is the author of the book? Remember, the author is the person who wrote the story. Who is the author? Is that Gary Paulson, Phil Collins, or James Patterson? Who is the author? Gary Paulson, Phil Collins, or James Patterson? Go ahead and circle your answer or write it down on your paper. That's right. The author is Gary Paulson. Gary Paulson wrote the story Hatchet. All right, let's look at number 3. Brian thought he was going to die. Did he? Yes, he did. Yes, he thought he was going to die. No, he didn't think that. Or you're just not sure. So if you have your paper, circle the correct answer or write it down. Yep, you're right. Brian thought he was going to die. He didn't. If you remember in the other chapter, the pilot died from a heart attack. Brian didn't. He just thought he was. Okay, so let's go on to the next two questions that are relevant to Chapter 3. What did Brian crash the plane into? The mall, a clearing, or water, the lake? What did Brian crash the plane into? The mall, a clearing, or the lake? Make your choice. Circle it. Write down the answer. Ever which one works better for you. Yep, you're right. He crashed it into the lake. That's right. So you should have circled lake or wrote down the answer lake. Okay, let's look at question number 5. It's the last question for this chapter, but we still have 3 questions for the next chapter. Number 5. Brian swam to land. Did he? Yes, he swam to land. No, he didn't. I'm just not sure. Okay, so circle your answer on your paper if you have this in front of you. Or if you don't, just write it down. Yes, no, not sure. You're right. Brian did swim to land. Yes. So you should have yes circled. You should have circled yes or wrote down the word yes. Okay. Get ready for chapter 4. The last 3 questions. Was Brian hurt? So, what did the story say? Was Brian hurt? Yes, he was. No, he wasn't. I'm not sure. Was he hurt? Circle yes, no, or not sure. You can circle them if you have this in front of you, or just write it down. You don't have to have this. You are correct. Brian was hurt. If you remember in the story, everything hurt Brian after that crash. So you should have circled yes or wrote the word yes down. Okay, ready for question number 7? Brian said something was eating him. What was eating him? What's he mean something was eating him? Was it a lion, a moose, or bugs? Mosquitoes, bugs. What was eating him? A lion, moose, or bugs? Circle your answer or write it down. You're right. It was bugs or mosquitoes. I don't think the story specifically said mosquitoes, but the pictures of the bugs. That's what was bothering Brian. Last question. Question number 8. Did Brian sleep after the plane crash? Yes, no, or neither's correct. Did Brian sleep after the plane crash? Yes, no, or neither. Circle your answer or write down the correct choice. You're right. He did sleep after the plane crash. Remember in the book, he said he was really tired. Actually, I think that's how the chapter ended. Brian, he was tired. He watched the water. Brian fell asleep against the tree. So that was how we ended chapter 4. Now, if you remember from chapter 1 and 2, the last thing we did in that chapter was I asked you to write down or draw a picture of 2 things you would want if you were stranded. Brian has his hatchet that his mom gave him. I made the suggestion of a first aid kit. What else did you write down? Did you think maybe he might need some fishing line and a hook to catch something to eat? What about maybe a lighter so he could start a fire? What else did you come up with? Those were just a couple more examples. Okay, write them down, add them to it, draw your picture, whatever works better for you. Come up with some more things that you would want if you were stranded on an island or stranded anywhere. All right, that's it. That finishes chapter 3 and 4. We'll look at chapter 5 and 6 next time. I'll see you later. Bye.